Why did no one stop him? The room smelled of sweat, rubber, and quiet anticipation, the kind of air that trembles before something goes wrong. Boots scuffed against the mat, shoulders brushed. The recruits were packed shoulder to shoulder, murmuring under their breath as if this wasn't training but theater. And at the center of it all stood Lieutenant Ethan Briggs. Broad shoulders, polished confidence, and the kind of grin that came from never being told no. Across from him stood her. Sergeant Lee Monroe, early 30s, calm, unmoved. Her hair was tied back tight, regulation neat. Her light tan skin bore one thin scar along her left cheek, not ugly, not loud, just sharp, like a line cut by history itself. She didn't fidget, she didn't glare. She just stood straight, arms at her sides, eyes leveled at a man who thought power was volume. Briggs circled her like a predator. "On my floor," he said. The words rolled slow, deliberate. "Rank doesn't save you. Biology doesn't lie." The crowd chuckled, half nervous, half cruel. Lee didn't move, one slow breath in, one slow breath out. Then he did it. A slap, open-handed, full force, cracked across her jaw so loud it split the air. Every whisper, every smirk, every sound in that room died in an instant. 2 seconds later, Ethan Briggs was flat on his back. He didn't even understand how he'd gotten there. His chest struggled for air. His eyes blinked up at the ceiling. Lee hadn't flinched. She hadn't shouted. She'd simply moved, clean, efficient, without rage or ego, and gravity had done the rest. The recruits didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They just stared because they'd never seen something so fast and so calm. No one knew who she really was, not yet. She had arrived at Fort Moore under an administrative reassignment. That's all the orders said. A phrase vague enough to silence questions, and sharp enough to warn off curiosity. She didn't drink, didn't gossip, didn't complain. Her cot was always aligned to inspection standards. Her locker was textbook perfect. In the mornings, before anyone else had even rolled out of their bunks, she was already on the combatives' mat, shadow sparring with no music, no mirror, no witness. Just her and the rhythm of breathing, in, out, control. The younger recruits whispered. "She's too calm," they said. "She's seen something." Yeah, but what? No one could guess that what they were seeing, the stillness, the poise, was muscle memory forged somewhere far from Georgia. Somewhere saltier, louder. Somewhere she no longer spoke about. Sometimes when she was alone, the memories crept in anyway, the ocean wind, the black water, the metallic scent of gun oil mixed with salt. Then she'd shake her head once, exhale, and go back to the drills. You can't afford ghosts when you're trying to disappear. Briggs noticed her silence early. And for a man like him, silence was an insult. He was everything the Army rewarded on paper: fit, loud, commanding, but brittle underneath. The kind of leader who needed an audience to feel like one. Lee's indifference was a mirror he couldn't bear to look into. He started small. Corporate soldier, he'd mutter when she filled out reports with flawless precision. Paper ranger, when she corrected a recruit's posture without raising her voice. She never rose to it. "Yes, sir," was all she'd say. But every time she earned respect from the others, when a recruit ran beside her until the finish line, when she stayed late to help a struggling private fix his grip, he felt his authority slip 1 inch lower. At night when the gym was empty, she'd train alone. Soft thuds echoed off the walls, controlled falls, rolls, transitions, over and over, until the movements blurred into something almost meditative. The kind of repetition that hides pain in discipline. Sometimes she'd stop, close her eyes. And for one moment, she wasn't in Georgia anymore. She was somewhere else, on a pitching boat, under a black sky, counting waves between heartbeats. Then she'd open her eyes again, and Sergeant Monroe would return to the mat. Briggs's resentment festered. He saw recruits listening to her instead of him. He saw the quiet nods of respect she received, the kind that couldn't be ordered, only earned. He decided to take it back, publicly. If she wouldn't bend, he'd break her. So he planned a demonstration. He called it combat realism. That Friday the combatives' room was packed. The air was thick and humid. Everyone knew this wasn't about instruction anymore. It was about ego. Briggs stood at the center, barking orders like he owned the ground itself. Pair up. Resistance, real contact. Then his gaze locked on her. Sergeant Monroe, he said, front and center. She stepped forward, calm, unhurried. Yes, sir. The recruits formed a loose circle. Some grinned, some looked away. Everyone felt the undercurrent, the tension that comes before a bad decision. Briggs didn't give her one opponent, he gave her 5. One after another. You, and you, he pointed. She stays. The first charged, full of adrenaline and poor timing. Lee sidestepped, caught his wrist, rolled her shoulder and placed him gently on the mat. He blinked, confused. She helped him up. The second tried to muscle her, grabbed too high, too tight. She broke posture, swept him sideways, and guided him down like a falling curtain. No anger, just precision. By the third, the laughter had stopped. The recruits had begun to realize something. She wasn't just stronger. She was untouchable in a way strength couldn't explain. Each move she made looked simple until you tried to replicate it. Then you realized it was mastery wearing the mask of calm. By the 5th, even Briggs's smirk was slipping. He tried to recover it with sarcasm. Gentlemen, he said, loud enough for the room, go easy, she's fragile. A few forced chuckles, nothing more. Lee didn't look up, she didn't look at him. She just reset her stance. Feet firm, eyes steady, breath slow. Then came the moment that changed everything. Briggs stepped onto the mat himself. This is instruction, he said, voice dripping with false calm. Demonstration purposes only. Someone in the back muttered, this is a bad idea. Another whispered, he won't go too far, will he? Briggs grabbed her wrist hard, yanking with more force than technique. Lee's foot shifted half an inch. Sir, she said softly, that's enough. He didn't stop. He twisted harder, trying to provoke her. He wanted the crowd to see her lose composure. She doesn't want contact, he shouted. She wants theory. A few uneasy laughs. Her voice remained level. Sir, that's enough. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel his breath. Is it? Then the slap. Harder, louder, final. The crack echoed against the cinderblock walls like a rifle shot. Every soldier froze. Lee's head turned with the impact. Her hair shifted slightly. Then she came back to center. No expression, no rage, just stillness. And that's when the room truly went silent. Because what came next didn't feel like revenge. It felt like physics correcting arrogance. She moved. One step forward, a twist. Her hand found his wrist. Her elbow shaped his leverage. His weight betrayed him. He hit the mat hard, the same spot his confidence had stood seconds before. 2 seconds, maybe less. Briggs gasped, unable to pull air. His arm obeyed her control completely. She applied no more pressure than necessary. Sir, she said calmly, stop fighting, exhale. He tried. The breath came out as a ragged wheeze. Good, she said quietly. Around them, 50 soldiers stared. They understood, even the ones who didn't know technique. This wasn't aggression, this was control. She released him slowly, stepped back. Stood at attention. Yes, sir, she said again. As if nothing had happened. But everything had. Briggs stood, his pride in shambles. His voice wavered. The lesson, he muttered, is that resistance changes the equation. No one believed him. The room had already learned its real lesson. Someone whispered, she didn't even look angry. Another replied, she didn't need to. Training resumed in awkward silence. Briggs pretended nothing had happened, barking orders that no one heard. The recruits moved mechanically, eyes flicking back to Lee, the calm center of the storm. When it ended, no one spoke. Briggs stormed out. Lee stayed behind, kneeling to realign the mats one by one. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, the same as before the slap. Only one thing was different now. The room carried a weight it hadn't before. Respect. As she reached forward to smooth the last corner, her sleeve slipped. A thin strip of tape at her wrist came loose. Private Miller, the youngest in the group, froze mid-step, his eyes narrowed. On her forearm, just above the vein, was a faded black tattoo, a trident, sharp and unmistakable. Not decorative. Not new. Weathered by years of salt, sun, and things that don't make the news. He whispered to his friend, "That looks like a SEAL insignia." The friend scoffed, "Can't be, she's Army." "Still," Miller murmured, "I've seen that symbol before. My brother's a diver." Lee pulled her sleeve down. Didn't say a word. But the silence that followed said everything. Outside, the Georgia sky was turning gold over the trees. Inside, 50 soldiers stood in a room where a legend had just begun. And for the first time in years, Lee Monroe, the woman who didn't talk about her past, felt the weight of it stir again beneath her skin. Because sometimes, a slap isn't just an insult. Sometimes, it's the spark that reveals who someone truly is. What wakes a soldier in the middle of the night? Sometimes it's memory, sometimes it's the sea. Lee Monroe didn't dream like other people. Her mind didn't wander, it replayed. Moments she'd buried under years of order and silence came back the same way they left, loud, fast, and salt-bitter. That night in the dark barracks, her eyes opened to the faint hum of the ceiling light. It was 02:00. Georgia humidity pressed against the windows like heavy breath. She sat up, elbows on her knees, hands clasped tight, waiting for the pulse in her throat to slow down. But the sound she heard wasn't the air conditioner. It was the ocean. The water never left her. She stopped trying to count how many times she'd heard it since the Bahrain operation. The mission that wasn't supposed to happen. The one even the Navy didn't file properly. Back then she was Sergeant Monroe. She was Chief Petty Officer Lee Monroe, Naval Special Warfare, SEAL Team 7. A name erased from rosters, from commendations, from every official record that preferred silence to truth. The mission had been simple on paper. Reconnaissance on a suspected arms transfer along the pier. Night insertion, 0 contact, 0 noise. But missions written in ink rarely survive the ocean. The water was black that night, a mirror-swallowing light. 6 of them in the Zodiac. Engines off, oars silent, only breathing and the hiss of rubber against current. 2 clicks out, whispered Ray's her second. Lee nodded, no lights, no chatter. Every command she gave was clipped, steady, the rhythm of someone who didn't need to prove authority. The pier ahead was nothing but a skeletal outline, half rust, half shadow. Their target, a container marked as agricultural equipment, rerouted from Muscat. Intel said small arms. Later they'd learn it was much worse. They docked quietly, perfectly. Until the shot. A single sharp crack split the air. The man in front, Logan, dropped before anyone saw where it came from. "Sniper," someone hissed. "Negative," Lee said immediately. Because she already knew, it wasn't a sniper, it was a spotter. The real fire was coming. "Go dark," she ordered. But the next burst tore through the dock, automatic fire, not precision. Ambush, Reyes shouted. The team scrambled behind cover as splinters and ricochets danced across the pier. Someone screamed, someone else didn't. Lee felt the sting on her cheek, something hot fast slicing through air. She wiped it without looking. Blood, just blood. Chief, Reyes called, "We're pinned." "Negative," she replied, already scanning. "We're bait." It wasn't random fire. Someone had waited, watched. Someone had known they were coming. She checked her watch, 01:37. The extraction window was closing. "Plan C," she said. Reyes froze. "We don't have a plan C." "We do now." Lee grabbed the comms unit, ripped the battery, and stuffed it into her vest. "Reyes, you take Daniels and flank north. If they chase, drop the pier supports." He hesitated. "Do it," she said. That tone, even under fire, made hesitation impossible. They moved, she stayed. Bullets chewed the wood around her. Each crack of gunfire was a heartbeat she counted backwards. 5, 4, 3. Then silence. She didn't trust silence. When the first figure stepped onto the pier, Lee was already behind him. Her blade pressed to his throat before his rifle cleared his shoulder. He froze. She whispered, "Who sent you?" He spat a curse in Arabic, then tried to twist free. She didn't push the blade. She just shifted weight, angled, and he dropped unconscious before he hit the planks. "Raise status." "Static." "Then charges set, we're clear." "Copy." She glanced down at Logan, lifeless, half in the water, half out. No time for grief, not yet. She pulled his tag. Then she went over the side. The cold hit like memory. Salt burned the open cut on her cheek, but she didn't flinch. She kicked once, twice, body slicing through the dark like a shadow trained to survive. Above her, the pier glowed faintly red, charges armed. "Now," she whispered. The explosion rippled through the water, muffled, deadly, final. Wood, steel, and gunfire disappeared in a single breath. She surfaced, gasping. Waves slapped her face, indifferent. "Raise." No answer. Just static. She swam toward the Zodiac. It was gone. The ocean had taken it. Hours later, she washed up on the southern shore, alone, half-conscious. Her right hand still clenched around Logan's tags. The trident tattoo on her arm, once a symbol of pride, was now a memory of what she'd lost. Command debriefed her for 17 hours. Half the team was dead, the other half missing. Her report was sealed, her rank reassigned. They didn't say thank you. They said transfer pending. That was the last night she ever saw the sea. And even now, years later, she could still hear it when everything else went quiet. That's what woke her tonight. Not guilt, not trauma. Just the sound of the ocean reminding her it still remembered. She rose from the bunk, laced her boots, and slipped into the hallway. The base was asleep, except for the ghosts that never were. She entered the combatives' room, lights dim, mats cool. She knelt, pressed her palm against the surface. The smell of sweat and rubber grounded her back in the present. She started moving, slow drills at first, then faster, body tracing the old language of control. Leverage, breath, restraint. Not fighting, remembering. Her reflection in the window looked almost peaceful, until lightning flashed in the distance, and, for a second, she saw another face overlaying her own. Raise. Then gone. She exhaled. "Still here," she whispered. By sunrise, she was still on the mat. The same movement, the same focus. But something was shifting in the air around her. Whispers faint, spreading through Fort Moore like smoke under a door. She felt them even before she heard them. In the mess hall that morning, soldiers turned their heads as she walked by. Some curious, some cautious. the kind of silence that carries a question too dangerous to ask out loud. She could feel the story changing hands from witness to rumor, rumor to legend. They say she was Navy. No kidding. Someone saw a trident tattoo. Come on, that's impossible. SEALs don't transfer here. Then explain what happened on that mat. She didn't react. Didn't need to. But inside, something she'd buried deep began to stir again, not pride, not fear. Just the quiet realization that the past she'd tried to silence was now speaking for her. That evening, she sat alone in the gym again, unwrapping the tape around her wrist. The trident glinted faintly in the low light. She traced it once with her thumb, slow, almost reverent. It wasn't vanity, it was remembrance. Each line of that tattoo had been earned, with salt water, pain, and loyalty. With the faces of men who never made it home. With a promise she'd made to them long before the army ever learned her name. Stay calm, stay alive, carry the standard when no one else can. She rewrapped the wrist, tighter this time. Because tomorrow, the whispers would be louder. And soon enough, command would start asking questions too. But for now, in the half-light of an empty gym, Lee Monroe stood alone, calm, composed, ready. Her reflection looked back at her. The scar across her cheek caught the glow just enough to remind her that survival leaves its own kind of signature. And as she took one final breath before dawn, a thought crossed her mind like a whisper from the sea itself. You can leave the water, but the water never leaves you. What happens when chaos meets calm? Most soldiers freeze, some shout. But a few, very few, become quieter. Lee Monroe was one of them. 3 days had passed since the slap. 3 days since the quiet in the training bay had turned into whispers that traveled faster than sound. By now, everyone at Fort Moore had heard the story, some version of it at least. A lieutenant humiliated, a sergeant who didn't flinch, and a slap that rewrote the chain of command in a single breath. But the truth was more complicated. The truth always is. She didn't walk around like someone who'd won anything. She didn't hold her chin higher or talk louder. She just kept doing what she'd done before, training, cleaning, teaching, moving through her days with precision and calm that made others uneasy. The louder the rumors got, the quieter she became. And the quieter she became, the louder the respect around her grew. That morning began like any other. The Georgia heat was already thick, coating everything in humidity. The combatives' bay smelled like sweat and rubber mats, and the faint tang of metal from the air vents. Lee was sweeping, her motions unhurried, balanced, as though even the broom had a rhythm to it. Across the gym, Lieutenant Briggs was talking too much again. His pride was healing slower than his bruises. Each word he spoke felt like an attempt to convince himself he still mattered. He'd written reports, framed the incident as a misunderstanding in the pursuit of realism. Command hadn't replied. He was waiting for a response that never came, and that silence was worse than any reprimand. So he tried to reclaim control where he still could, in his voice. "All right," he barked, "everyone form up. We've got drills to run before inspection." Lee leaned the broom against the wall and stepped onto the mat. "Sergeant Monroe," Briggs said, not looking at her, "you'll assist with the demonstrations." "Yes, sir." Her tone didn't carry defiance. It carried professionalism, the kind that disarms a man used to confrontation. He hated that tone. The recruits lined up, the air tense with anticipation. Someone whispered, "Think command will actually show up today?" "Doubt it," another replied. "They've got bigger things too." The intercom crackled. "All personnel prepare for unannounced inspection. Command presence inbound." The voice cut off. A heartbeat later, the gym exploded into motion. Boots thundered. Equipment rattled. Briggs straightened instantly, shouting orders no one could follow fast enough. Line it up, move, fix your gear, clean those mats. Panic had a smell. It was sharp, metallic, contagious. Lee moved through it like smoke through wind. No shouting, no rushing. She simply adjusted a misplaced duffel, wiped a streak of dust from a mirror, and straightened a recruit's collar on her way by. "Breathe," she murmured to him. "Yes, ma'am." Her calm felt like gravity. It pulled everything else into order. Then came the first sound. A scream. Sharp, real, not staged. Everyone froze. On the far side of the room, Private Daniels lay on the concrete, one arm bent wrong. He'd tripped over a rolled mat edge while running with equipment. Blood pooled beneath his elbow. His face was pale. Briggs was the first to move, too fast, too loud. "Medic, medic on the floor." His voice cracked halfway through the call. Half the recruits rushed toward Daniels at once, shouting different orders. Hands pressed, pulled, panicked. "Get pressure on it." "No, above the joint." "Somebody get the kit." The scene spiraled in seconds. Too many voices, too much fear. Then a single voice cut through the noise. "Stop." It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Everyone froze. Lee was already kneeling beside Daniels. Her tone carried the weight of command, the kind that isn't rank, it's instinct. "Back up," she said calmly. "Give me space." She peeled off her outer sleeve, tore it into strips, and pressed a hand to the wound. "Pulse steady," she muttered under her breath, assessing. "Fracture above the radius. We need elevation, not pressure." She looked up at the nearest recruit. "You hold his shoulder still." "Yes, ma'am." "You get me a strap from your vest, now." The private fumbled, handed it over. She looped it above the elbow, tightened, braced, secured. Daniels gasped. Lee's voice softened but didn't falter. "You're okay, soldier. Look at me. Stay with me." Her hands moved fast, efficient, controlled. Everything about her, the posture, the breathing, the steady tone, felt like someone who'd done this too many times before. She wasn't improvising. She was remembering. By the time the medics arrived, the bleeding had stopped. Daniel's pulse was strong, his breathing steady. The lead medic knelt beside Lee and froze. Recognition flickered across his face. "Ma'am." Lee didn't look up. "He's stable, fracture only, watch for shock." "Yes, ma'am," the medic stammered. Then quietly, "You were on the Bahrain op, weren't you?" Every head turned. Lee's eyes stayed fixed on the patient. "No idea what you're talking about, Corporal." The medic swallowed. "With respect, ma'am, I saw the report. You pulled out 4 guys when the pier went down. Corporal," she interrupted, still calm, "focus on your patient." "Yes, ma'am." But the way he said ma'am changed. It wasn't procedural anymore. It was reverent. When the medics carried Daniels out, the room was silent again. Not the kind of silence that follows fear. The kind that follows realization. Command Sergeant Major Robert Hayes had entered halfway through the scene. No one had seen him walk in. But everyone felt him now. He stood at the edge of the mat, arms folded, eyes fixed on Lee. He said nothing, just watched. Lee rose to her feet, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and straightened her uniform. "Situation under control, sir," she said quietly. Hayes nodded once. Then turned to Briggs. "Lieutenant," he said, "you were in charge here." Briggs's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Hayes didn't press. He didn't need to. He'd seen everything he needed to see. That night, Fort Moore changed again. Not officially, not in paperwork, but in the space between conversations. The rumor spread with new fuel. The medic recognized her. He said she was in Bahrain. I looked it up. There was an operation there, classified but real. The whispers carried on now, not mockery. Some called her the ghost, others chief. Briggs avoided the gym that night. He stayed in his quarters, replaying the scene over and over in his head. Not the chaos, but her voice. That calm, quiet command that had silenced everyone, including him. It wasn't rank. It was something older, deeper. The kind of control that only comes from surviving what breaks most people. He tried to write another report. Incident during inspection. Sergeant intervened appropriately. But the words looked hollow on the page. He stopped, set the pen down, and stared at his reflection in the window. He saw the truth there, what every soldier in that gym had seen. Lee Monroe wasn't just calm. She was trained at a level beyond anything he'd ever touched. He rubbed his jaw unconsciously. The memory of that slap still lived in the muscles there. She could have broken him that day. She hadn't. And that restraint, more than her skill, was what haunted him. Meanwhile, Lee was back on the mat. Alone again. Always alone. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. She practiced transitions barefoot, controlled landings, soft falls, slow breathing. Discipline wasn't her armor. It was her penance. She paused, exhaled, and leaned against the wall. The gym smelled of salt again, or maybe she imagined it. Sometimes in the stillness after drills, the ghosts of Bahrain whispered back. Voices of men she couldn't save. Water swallowing, names the world would never hear again. She touched the trident through her sleeve. A silent promise. Still here. Outside, the base lights flickered one by one, fading into the thick southern night. Inside, Lee Monroe's shadow stretched long across the mat, the same mat that had witnessed arrogance, violence, and now, revelation. The whispers would grow louder tomorrow. And soon, someone with authority would come looking for answers. But tonight, she allowed herself one rare indulgence. She looked up toward the ceiling, toward the dull hum of the lights, and whispered softly, almost prayerfully. Stay calm, stay quiet, stay ready. Her voice barely carried, but in the silence of that empty gym, it felt like a vow. The kind forged not by victory, but by survival. Because composure isn't born from control. It's born from loss. And the people who learn that lesson never raise their voices again. What does strength sound like when no one's listening? Sometimes it sounds like silence breaking. The barracks were dark, except for the thin glow of a hallway light slipping through the doorframe. Fort Moore slept in its rigid rhythm, boots by beds, uniforms pressed, dreams scattered across metal bunks. But in the corner room at the end of the hall, one soldier sat awake, elbows on her knees, hands trembling just enough for the tremor to be invisible in daylight. Lee Monroe hadn't slept in 48 hours. She tried, God knows she'd tried. But every time her eyes closed, she saw water. Black water. Gunfire flashing across it. The sound of wood splintering and waves swallowing names. She trained herself to be calm under anything, fire, fear, even humiliation. But memory was different. You can't outtrain ghosts. She stared down at her hands. Callous, scarred, steady. Hands that had built trust, broken men twice her size, and pulled bleeding bodies from an ocean that didn't give them back. Her fingertips traced the ridge of the faint scar on her cheek, the one everyone saw but no one dared ask about anymore. She didn't hate the mark. She hated what it reminded her of. Because that scar wasn't a wound. It was a timestamp, the exact moment when she stopped being someone's sister, someone's friend, and became something else entirely. A weapon. The room was silent. Outside, a night storm rolled in, slow and heavy. Thunder rumbled far away, the kind that creeps closer one heartbeat at a time. She rose, opened her locker, and stared at the single envelope tucked in the corner. The Navy's eagle and anchor emblem stamped on the corner, faded now, but unmistakable. Her fingers hovered over it. She'd never opened it. Didn't need to. She knew what it said. It was the official recognition of what she'd done in Bahrain, and who hadn't come back. The Navy had offered her transfer, commendation, therapy, everything that looked like healing on paper. She asked for reassignment instead. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere she could disappear. Lightning flickered through the narrow window, and for a second, the reflection staring back at her looked younger, the version of Lee who joined the Navy at 19, full of certainty and defiance. Don't ever mistake calm for weakness, her old instructor had said once. She lived by that. But he'd never told her what calm costs. She pulled the envelope free, turned it in her hand, and whispered to no one. Still sealed, still here. Then she set it down and sat on the floor beside her cot, back against the wall, eyes on the ceiling. That's when the tears came, slow, soundless, stubborn. She didn't sob. She'd forgotten how. They just fell quietly, as if the body remembered what the mind refused to. The first drop of rain hit the window. Then another. Then 1,000 more. The storm rolled overhead, thunder shaking the barracks. But to Lee, it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the pier collapsing. Like water closing over steel. Like rays shouting her name across a black horizon she couldn't reach. She pressed her palms to her temples and breathed deep, deliberate, disciplined, the way she used to during drown-proofing drills. In, out, control. Her heart slowed. The tears stopped. The world returned. That was the difference between Lee Monroe and everyone else. She didn't stop herself from breaking. She just didn't stay broken. At 04:00 she stood, washed her face and tied her hair back. When the others woke up an hour later, she was already gone. The combatives' bay lights hummed overhead when she entered. Same smell, same silence. The mats gleamed from last night's cleaning. She stepped onto them barefoot as always. For a moment she just stood there, letting the quiet wrap around her like armor. Then she moved. A roll. A transition. A throw. Every motion sharp, precise, and whisper smooth. Each breath matched to movement, inhale to expand, exhale to release. It wasn't training. It was remembering who she was when words failed. As she practiced, the door creaked open. Private Miller, the youngest recruit, stood frozen at the entrance, unsure whether to speak. He had that nervous energy of someone who wanted to ask but knew better. "Come in," Lee said without turning. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered. He stepped onto the mat, hesitant. She finished the sequence, exhaled, and finally looked at him. "You're up early, Private." "Yes, ma'am, I couldn't sleep." She nodded once, then train. He hesitated. "Permission to ask something." "Go ahead." He swallowed. "The medic yesterday, he said he recognized you, from Bahrain." Lee said nothing. "I looked it up," he continued softly. "There's barely anything online, but there was an op. It says special warfare involvement." Still nothing. He shifted his weight, embarrassed by the silence. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize for curiosity," she said finally, turning toward him. "Just make sure you can handle the answer." He froze. She stepped closer, voice quiet. "I was there, I came back, others didn't. That's all you need to know." Miller nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Then, as if gathering courage from somewhere, he said, "They're saying you're the reason training feels different now." Lee frowned slightly. Different how? He glanced down, like people actually listen. She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "Listening isn't respect, Private. It's the start of it." He nodded again, unsure what to do with that truth. Then she added, quieter, "Go sweep the mat. Learn to keep the space clean before you learn to fight on it." "Yes, ma'am." He smiled faintly, relieved. When he left, Lee exhaled, a sound closer to pain than peace. It wasn't the boy's question that shook her. It was how easily she'd answered it. Every word brought Bahrain back to life. And for the first time in years, she realized how close her past was to catching up with her. By midday, the whispers were everywhere. Even the senior NCOs had started asking questions they weren't supposed to. Someone had seen the Navy envelope in her locker. Someone else claimed they'd seen her training logs, blacked out sections, missing years. Command silence doesn't stop rumor, it feeds it. Lee ignored it all. But the air had changed. The way soldiers stood when she entered. The way Briggs avoided her gaze now. The way the younger recruits whispered the word chief when they thought she couldn't hear. The title stung, not because it was wrong but because it was true. That night, as the sun dropped behind the Georgia pines, she returned to the gym again. Same ritual, same silence. But this time she didn't move. She just sat at the edge of the mat, knees pulled up, watching the last light fade through the windows. The ghosts came quieter now, not with screams or gunfire, but with voices she remembered from long ago. Logan laughing about bad coffee. Ray's humming a tune from back home. Little fragments of a life before silence became her shield. She spoke aloud, her voice barely audible. "I kept my promise." It wasn't pride. It was confession. The storm outside had passed, but inside her it still rained. Always would. At 23:00, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, hesitant. She didn't turn. "Didn't expect to find you here this late," a voice said. "Briggs." She kept her eyes forward. "Neither did I, sir." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "I owe you an apology." She didn't move. "You already gave one, sir." "Not one that matters." His voice cracked a little, not weakness, but honesty. "I thought control made me strong. Turns out I was just loud." Lee stood, finally facing him. "Everyone learns the hard way, Lieutenant." He nodded. "Yeah, but not everyone gets a teacher like you." She didn't reply. For a moment they just stood there, the silence between them heavier than any punishment. Then Briggs said, "Command asking questions about you, about what happened. Hayes is coming tomorrow." Lee's eyes didn't flicker. She just nodded once. "Understood." Briggs lingered as if he wanted to say more, but the weight of his own shame kept him still. When he finally left, Lee whispered to the empty room. "So it begins." She looked down at the mats, the same surface that had seen her calm, her fury, her ghosts. And she knew tomorrow it would see her truth. There was no fear left in her. Only readiness. She untied the wrist tape, letting it fall loose, the trident beneath it gleaming faintly in the fluorescent light. She stared at it for a long moment, then covered it again. Because tomorrow she wouldn't need to hide it. When she finally turned off the lights, her reflection lingered in the dark window for half a heartbeat longer than it should have. Almost like the sea itself was watching. And somewhere deep inside, she heard that voice again, the one she tried to forget. "Calm hands save lives." She smiled faintly. "Still do." That night the storm moved east. But at Fort Moore, another one was just about to break. Because when the morning came, command wouldn't just be inspecting drills. They'd be opening a file that hadn't been read in years, a file stamped classified. NAVSBCWAR in letters even silence couldn't erase. And by the time the sun set again, every soldier on that base would know who Sergeant Lee Monroe really was. Morning came slow that day. Soft light through dusty blinds. rain still clinging to the air. Lee Monroe woke before the alarm, same as always. She sat up, bare feet on cold floor, the kind of silence that comes before a decision humming around her. There was no nervousness, no dread, just clarity, the kind that soldiers recognize before a fight and survivors recognize before confession. Today wasn't about Bahrain. It wasn't about the lieutenant or the rumors. It was about truth, the one thing she'd spent years running from and carrying at the same time. She washed her face, tied her hair back, buttoned her uniform with slow precision. Every motion deliberate, steady. Each fold sharp enough to cut hesitation. On the inside pocket of her blouse, she slipped the sealed Navy envelope. Not because she planned to open it, because she wanted to remember that silence is still a kind of strength, but today it had to end. Outside, the base was waking. Cadence calls echoing faintly through the Georgia mist. Trucks rumbling, the metallic rhythm of discipline coming to life. She walked to the gym. Not for training. For grounding. The mats were still damp from last night's mopping. She knelt in the center, palms pressed to the surface, eyes closed. Breathing steady. Listening. Every base has its own heartbeat. The sound of boots, drills, orders, laughter, silence. Fort Moore's beat was changing, and she could feel it. She whispered under her breath, "Stay calm, stay steady, stay ready." Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the line of recruits jogging through morning fog. Their voices carried across the field, sharp, youthful, unbroken. She envied them. The simplicity of orders followed. The clarity of purpose not yet tested. But she also pitied them, because one day they'd learn the truth she had. That obedience builds soldiers, but loss builds warriors. At 800, the loudspeaker crackled. All training personnel report to Hangar 2 for assembly. Command presence inbound. No one needed to say her name. She knew. She left the gym quietly, walking past faces that turned to watch her, some with curiosity, some with respect, a few with fear. Briggs stood near the doorway, waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His uniform was perfect, but his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Sergeant," he said, voice lower than usual. "Lieutenant, you ready for this?" She tilted her head slightly. "Doesn't matter." He nodded, ashamed, then said, "Hayes asked for you by name." "I know." "How?" She gave the faintest smile. "Command doesn't ask for ghosts unless they've already seen the file." Briggs swallowed. "I didn't mean." "I know you didn't." Her tone softened, but meaning doesn't change truth. Then she walked past him and into the hangar. The room was massive, high ceilings, flags lining the walls, rows of soldiers standing at attention. The air buzzed with whispers that stopped the moment she entered. Every eye turned. Every rumor met its proof. Command Sergeant Major Robert Hayes stood at the front, flanked by 2 officers and a clerk holding a digital tablet. Hayes wasn't a man of theatrics. He spoke like someone who'd seen too much and survived too long to waste breath. When he looked at Lee, it wasn't judgment in his eyes. It was recognition. "Sergeant Monroe," he said. "Sir." "Front and center." She stepped forward, boots echoing across the polished floor. Stopped 2 meters from him. Stood straight. No fear, no fidgeting. Just presence. "Lieutenant Briggs," Hayes said without turning. "Sir." "Step forward." Briggs obeyed, shoulders tight. Hayes looked between them, the officer and the sergeant, 2 soldiers bound by a mistake that had become a lesson. "I've read the reports," Hayes began. His voice carried through the hangar like slow thunder. "I've spoken to medics, I've spoken to staff, and I've looked at a file that most of you aren't cleared to see. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Lee's expression didn't change. Hayes continued. What I found wasn't misconduct, it was history. He looked directly at her now. You were Navy before this, weren't you? Yes, sir. Special warfare. Yes, sir. Team 7. She paused just long enough for the silence to grow. Yes, sir. The hangar shifted. The whispering started again, restrained by discipline but not by disbelief. Hayes nodded slowly, eyes still on her. Bahrain, 2015. Classified engagement. Half your unit KIA. Extraction under fire. You were the last one out. Lee didn't answer. She didn't need to. Hayes took a step closer. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her voice was quiet even. Because I didn't come here to be remembered, sir. For a moment, the entire hangar went still. The kind of silence you can hear. The kind that happens when truth fills the room and no one knows what to do with it. Hayes studied her, expression unreadable. Then, with surprising gentleness, he said, Sometimes, Sergeant, not being remembered is the most honorable thing a warrior can do. He turned toward the formation. Let me be clear to all personnel, what Sergeant Monroe did years ago was not a rumor. It was service, classified, unacknowledged, and exceptional. The recruits shifted, eyes wide. Even the veterans looked stunned. Hayes continued. She's here because she chose to be, not because she fell, not because she was punished, but because the Navy asked her to carry quiet, and she did. His tone softened. You can learn more from her silence than from any speech I could give you. Briggs lowered his eyes. He'd come expecting discipline, maybe for her, maybe for himself. But what he'd gotten was perspective. Hayes looked at him. Lieutenant. Sir, you struck a woman who's seen more war than you'll ever read about. Briggs's throat tightened. I know, sir. Do you? Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because if you did, you'd understand what she gave you in that moment. Briggs frowned, confused. Hayes continued. She gave you restraint, the thing no manual teaches, the thing men earn only after they've lost enough to understand mercy. Briggs swallowed hard, unable to meet Lee's eyes. Hayes turned back toward her. Sergeant Monroe, he said. Sir, you've carried silence long enough. He gestured to the clerk. The man stepped forward, holding out a digital tablet. On it a scanned commendation, still marked restricted access. Hayes read aloud. For acts of extraordinary valor under hostile conditions, Chief Petty Officer Lee Monroe demonstrated selfless leadership, saving multiple lives at the cost of her own team's extraction window. Due to the classified nature of the mission, formal recognition is withheld. He looked up. Consider it unwithheld. Lee didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't bow. She just stood there quiet, the faintest shimmer of emotion flickering behind her eyes. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was the ache of ghosts finally being named. Permission to speak, sir, she said. Granted. She looked at the room, at the recruits who now stood straighter, at Briggs who could barely breathe, at Hayes who watched her with understanding deeper than command. Her voice was low, calm, and steady. What happened in Bahrain wasn't heroism, it was survival, and survival isn't clean. It's loud, it's ugly, and it changes you. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Don't look at me like I'm something you're supposed to become. Look at me like a reminder of what it costs to keep your humanity when the world wants to take it. The silence that followed was sacred. No one shifted, no one coughed. Even Hayes didn't interrupt. Then she added, softer. Respect isn't about who salutes first. It's about who remembers why they're standing. Hayes exhaled slowly. Then he nodded. "Well said, Chief." Her eyes lifted slightly. She hadn't heard that title in years. For the first time since Bahrain, it didn't sting. He offered a slow salute. She returned it clean, crisp, absolute. Every soldier in the hangar followed, one after another, until the entire formation stood in silent salute. Not protocol. Recognition. The moment passed quietly. Hayes turned away, signaling the end. Back to work, soldiers. As the ranks broke apart, Lee stood alone for a moment longer, then began to leave. Briggs intercepted her near the exit. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, awkward, humbled. Then he said softly, "Ma'am, I don't think I'll ever forget what you said today." She stopped, looked at him. "You will," she said. "Everyone does." Then, after a pause, "But you'll remember how it felt. That's enough." She walked out, boots echoing against the hangar floor, the sound of dignity leaving the room without needing to prove it belonged there. Outside, the morning had turned to sun. The rain had burned off the asphalt, steam rising like breath from the earth itself. Lee stopped, pulled the envelope from her pocket, and held it up against the light. For a second, the seal caught the sun and glowed gold. Then she tore it in half. The paper fluttered away, caught in the wind, disappearing across the base like the last trace of a secret that no longer needed to exist. She stood there, eyes closed, the faintest smile on her lips. Not relief. Not triumph. Just peace. Because some truths aren't meant to be carried forever. They're meant to be handed back to the silence they came from. And as she turned toward the horizon, where the trees met the bright edge of morning, one quiet thought crossed her mind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply stands. Sometimes peace doesn't last. Sometimes it's just the silence that comes before the next test. Fort Moore had been calm for 3 days after the revelation. No whispers, no stares. Just quiet respect, the kind that lives in posture, not words. Lee Monroe walked the base like someone learning to breathe again. Her name carried weight now, not as rumor but as reverence. But the attention felt heavier than judgment ever had. She'd spent years surviving by being invisible. Now invisibility was gone. And the eyes that once ignored her now followed every step. Still, she stayed steady. Morning drills, evening runs, quiet meals. The same rhythm that had saved her once before. Until the sirens broke it. It started as a low hum, a vibration through the floor, like thunder without sound. Then came the alarm. Emergency alert, range sector 4. All non-essential personnel clear the perimeter. Lee froze mid-step, her instincts waking before thought. Sector 4, the live fire range. The one near the fuel depot. She didn't wait for orders. She started running. By the time she reached the access road, the air was already changing, heat, smoke, confusion. Soldiers ran in all directions, some shouting, some frozen in disbelief. Explosion at the northern wall. Ammo shed hit. Fire spreading to the barracks line. She caught one of the corporals by the shoulder. "Who's in command?" "Captain Rourke, ma'am, but he's inside." Inside. The word hit like impact. Without hesitation, Lee pulled the emergency respirator from the wall and started toward the smoke. "Ma'am, wait," the corporal yelled. She didn't. The fire burned deep orange, thick, oily smoke curling upward in waves. Gunpowder and jet fuel, the worst kind of mix. The heat slapped her face the moment she crossed the threshold, and the world went narrow. Visibility, 5 meters. Sound muffled chaos. "Rourke," she shouted. "Nothing." She moved fast, low, one arm shielding her face. The air tasted like iron and burnt rubber. The kind of smell that sticks to your soul. A blast cracked nearby, one of the ammo crates cooking off. Shrapnel pinged off the walls. She ducked, rolling behind a support beam. For a second, she thought she heard the sea again, that same rushing, roaring silence that followed explosions. But this time, it wasn't memory. It was the fire breathing. Then she saw movement. Through the haze, a figure crawling, one leg dragging behind. Captain Rourke. She reached him in 3 strides, grabbed his vest and dragged him behind the beam. "Can you move?" He coughed hard, voice shredded. "Can't, my leg." She checked, shrapnel through the thigh, bleeding fast. "All right, stay with me." She tore a strip from his sleeve, wrapped it high above the wound, twisted with her knife handle until the bleeding slowed. Rourke gritted his teeth. "You shouldn't be in here." She glanced at him. "Neither should you." Another explosion, closer this time. The ceiling lights shattered. Sparks rained down like molten stars. Lee pulled Rourke's arm over her shoulder. "Up, we're moving." He tried to protest. "You'll never." "Captain, I didn't ask." Step by step, she moved through the smoke, using walls as guide. Every few seconds, the floor shook. Every few steps, something collapsed behind them. "Exits 10 meters east," she said, half to herself, half to the flames. Rourke's weight slowed her, but her pace never faltered. Her body remembered, the same rhythm she'd used in Bahrain, dragging rays across the pier. Same breath. Same fire. Different enemy. They broke through the first doorway. Fresh air hit like a wave. Soldiers ran toward them, shouting, forming a line with extinguishers and hoses. Lee shoved Rourke into waiting arms. "Medic, get pressure on that leg." Before anyone could stop her, she turned back. Someone else was still inside. She could feel it. "Monroe," someone yelled, "you're not cleared to re-enter." She didn't even slow down. Some people need orders. Others just need purpose. Inside again. The world was a furnace now. Flames danced like living things, searching for oxygen, for escape. She moved past the scorched equipment racks, scanning corners, floor, shadows. Then she saw him, a young private, pinned under a collapsed frame, one arm trapped. "Hold still," she shouted, dropping to her knees. His face was streaked with soot and tears. I can't, my arm." "You're fine, focus on me." She tried lifting the beam. Too heavy. She looked around, spotted a broken jack rod nearby. Wedged it under, leaned her weight, gritted teeth and pushed. Metal groaned, shifted, lifted just enough. "Now," she barked. The private slid free, gasping. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly. "Good, then run." They stumbled out together, coughing hard, collapsing into the open air. Medics swarmed in instantly. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Another checked her pulse. But Lee pushed them away gently. "I'm fine." Her voice was rough but steady. Always steady. Rourke was on a stretcher nearby, pale but conscious. Their eyes met. He managed a half-smile. "You ever gonna follow a damn order, Sergeant?" She shook her head. "Not the wrong ones." By afternoon, the fire was contained. No fatalities. 3 injured. None critical. Command credited, rapid response and leadership under pressure. But the soldiers who were there knew better. It wasn't leadership. It was instinct. And it had a name. That night, the base was different again. Quiet, reverent, alive. They called her Chief openly now. Not as a story, as a truth. Some even whispered, "the one who walks through fire." But Lee ignored the talk. She sat outside alone, by the range fence, watching the smoke drift into a dark red sunset. Rourke limped up to her, one leg bandaged, a crutch under his arm. He didn't salute. He just stood there, awkward, grateful. You saved my life, he said. She didn't look at him. You'd have done the same. He gave a small laugh. No, I'd have followed orders. She smiled faintly. Exactly. He hesitated. Hayes told me who you really were, SEAL Team 7. She nodded. He said you lost everyone but you. She said nothing. Rourke lowered his head. I'm sorry. For what? For surviving. She turned to look at him then, eyes calm, soft, unwavering. Don't ever be sorry for surviving, Captain. Be sorry if you stop learning from it. The silence after that was peaceful. Not heavy. Just quiet, the kind that only comes when the truth has been spoken enough times to finally rest. Rourke exhaled. You know, you could have been anything, officer, instructor, hell, you could run this base. She smiled faintly. That's the problem, sir. Running things never interested me. Saving them did. He nodded. And what about you? Who saves you? Her gaze drifted back toward the horizon. No one needs to, not anymore. As night fell, the stars came out, faint against the haze but steady. She leaned back, listening to the faint crackle of extinguished embers. In the distance, cadets marched under floodlights, calling cadence into the cool air. A sound that used to fade into noise now sounded like life itself. She closed her eyes. For once there was no sea, no fire, no ghosts, just breath and quiet, and the faint memory of a man's voice somewhere far away from a pier long gone. Calm hands save lives. The next morning, a formal notice arrived from command. Commendation pending, review board recommendation, leadership reinstatement. Lee read it once, then folded it neatly. Slipped it into her locker beside a single trident patch. She didn't need medals. Didn't need rank. Didn't need redemption. Because sometimes, surviving isn't about being chosen. It's about showing up, again and again, when the world catches fire and someone has to stay calm enough to walk through it. That evening, as she left the barracks, the younger recruit stood and saluted. She returned it, one by one, eyes steady, movements crisp. Not pride. Not command. Respect. When she reached the gate, she paused, looking back once. The sun was setting again, gold bleeding into the trees. Smoke still rose faintly from the far hills, proof of what had burned and what hadn't. She took a slow breath, whispering to herself, still here. And for the first time in years, it didn't sound like survival. It sounded like peace. Sometimes the past doesn't haunt you. It calls. And when it does, you answer, not because you want to, but because you owe it something. The call came just after dawn. Lee was finishing her run, sweat cooling under the soft Georgia sunrise. The base was quiet, peaceful in that fleeting way mornings always are before duty begins. Then her comm buzzed. Monroe, this is command. You're requested at operations in 15. No details, no tone of urgency. Just that clip precision that means this isn't routine. She didn't rush. She just nodded to herself, finished her lap and whispered, guess it's time. Inside the operations office, Command Sergeant Major Hayes was waiting, alone, standing by the window, sunlight cutting through the blinds across his face. He didn't turn when she entered. Morning, Chief. She stopped 2 paces behind him. Sir. He looked over his shoulder. Still hate that title. She gave the faintest smile. Still don't deserve it. Hayes studied her for a moment, the way her posture never faltered, the way calm seemed to live in her bones. Then he said quietly, I got a call from Naval Intelligence this morning, something you need to hear. He handed her a tablet. Encrypted file. Her name on it. Operation tag, Bahrain 2015, declassified partial record. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen that word in years. Hayes motioned toward the screen. Play it. The video flickered to life. Grainy, salt-stained footage from a drone's body cam. Smoke. Shadows. A pier breaking apart under fire. Then a voice. Male. Raspy, panicked but familiar. Monroe, do you copy? Chief, where the hell are you? Her breath caught. She whispered, Raise. Hayes nodded. He made it, picked up 2 months ago in Oman. Civilian rescue vessel found him half delirious, dehydrated and off the grid. The Navy confirmed identity last night. She stared at the screen, frozen mid-frame, her own name echoing across time. The voice she'd buried under years of silence had just pulled her back to life. Why now, she asked. Why after all this time? Hayes shrugged slightly. Sometimes the sea keeps secrets until it gets tired. She sat down slowly, hands folded on the table. For the first time since Bahrain, she looked uncertain. Does he know I'm alive? Hayes shook his head. Not yet. He's been in treatment and D.C. wants to see you. Lee stared at the floor. Her heart wasn't racing. It was remembering. Ray's had been her second, loyal, steady, stubborn. He was the one who'd told her to go when the pier collapsed. She'd assumed he hadn't made it. Assumed wrong. The guilt hit like a delayed wave. She moved on, or thought she had. Built peace on a lie the ocean had finally corrected. Hayes spoke softly. You don't owe anyone closure, Chief, but if I were you. He let the sentence hang. Lee finished it quietly. I'd go. He nodded once. I'll arrange transport. She stood, straightened her collar, eyes distant but steady. Thank you, sir. He paused. Lee. She turned. Be ready for what you'll see. People don't come back from that kind of silence the same. She gave a half smile. Neither did I. 2 days later, she arrived at Walter Reed. The building smelled like antiseptic and hope, 2 things that don't mix easily. She walked through white corridors lined with photos of soldiers, flags, folded hands. At the far end, a nurse led her to a recovery room. Door slightly ajar. Sunlight spilling through sheer curtains. Ray sat in a wheelchair, staring out at the trees beyond the glass. He looked older, thinner, his once black hair now streaked with gray. But his posture, still that same stubborn straightness. He turned at the sound of her boots. And for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he said softly, Chief. Her throat tightened. It's been a long time, Rays. He laughed, a broken sound that cracked mid-breath. I thought I was hallucinating again. You're not. He stared at her. Everyone said you were gone. They said the same about you. They stood there in silence, years of ghosts crowding the room between them. Finally he said, You look the same. You don't. He chuckled weakly. Yeah, the ocean's not kind. She moved closer, hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning the bandages along his arm. What happened after the blast? He looked away. Got thrown clear, woke up in the water. The current carried me to shore, miles south. Local fishermen found me, patched me up, and I disappeared. Couldn't face debriefs, couldn't face you. Her jaw tightened. Why not me? He looked at her then, eyes glassy, voice breaking. Because I thought I left you there, thought I killed you. Lee's breath hitched. It wasn't accusation. It was confession. She knelt beside the chair, placing a steady hand on his arm. No one killed anyone that night, Rays. The sea did what it always does, took what it wanted. He let out a long, uneven sigh. But you came back. She nodded. So did you. Minutes passed in silence. Not awkward, just heavy like a weight finally being acknowledged. Then Ray said softly, "I heard what you've been doing. Fort Moore, the fire, the lieutenant." She half smiled. News travels faster than it should, especially about legends. She shook her head. "Don't start." He smiled faintly, eyes damp. "You always hated recognition." "Still do." He leaned back, gaze softening. "I used to think you were fearless. Now I think you were just good at pretending." Lee looked away. "Fear doesn't stop you from moving. It just changes what direction you run." Ray's was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You ever think about going back?" "Back?" "To the teams, to the field. You're still built for it." She shook her head. "I'm not built for war anymore, Rays. I'm built for quiet." He smiled faintly. "You always did fight differently." She looked at him. "And you?" He exhaled. "I don't know what I'm built for anymore." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then start small, heal, walk, talk, live." He looked at her. "And you?" "I'll keep doing what I was trained for." "What's that?" She smiled small, almost sad. "Saving people who don't know they need saving." Before she left, Ray said something that stayed with her. "Chief, you remember what I told you that night, before everything went to hell?" She shook her head. He smiled. "I said don't die calm." She blinked. "I forgot." "Yeah, you were too busy proving me wrong." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere painful but healing. As she reached the door, Ray's called out, "Hey, Monroe." She turned. "You don't have to carry it anymore. What happened out there, it's over." She looked back at him, steady. "No, it's not over. It's just finally understood." Outside the hospital, the air smelled like rain. Same as Bahrain. Same as Georgia. The kind of smell that follows endings and beginnings alike. She walked to the parking lot, stopped and looked up at the sky, gray, endless and quiet. Then she whispered, "Rest easy, Rays. The sea can have what's left." Back at Fort Moore, the base was running drills again. Life had moved on, as it always does. But something in Lee had shifted. Not healed. Not erased. Just at peace. That night she sat on the mat again, same spot, same silence. But for once, she didn't see water when she closed her eyes. She saw light. Soft, warm, human. When the morning came, command called again. "Monroe, debrief complete. We're closing Bahrain." She stared at the comm for a long time before answering. "Understood." Then she whispered to herself, "About time." Some stories end with medals. Some end with scars. Hers ended with understanding, the kind that doesn't need applause or forgiveness, only stillness. She tied her wrist tape one last time, tightened it, and smiled faintly at the trident beneath. The ocean had finally gone quiet. Because sometimes redemption isn't earned in battle. It's found in the moment you stop fighting ghosts and start forgiving them. How does a soldier know when it's time to stop? Not when the orders end. Not when the medals shine. But when the silence finally feels like home. The air at Fort Moore was cold that morning. Winter had crept into Georgia, thin frost along the fences, mist curling over the fields where recruits ran through drills. Lee Monroe watched them from a distance, her hands tucked behind her back, breath clouding in the dawn light. Every command they shouted carried echo, sharp, bright, alive. It was the same sound she'd known all her life, but something inside her knew this was the last time she'd hear it as one of them. Not because she'd been told to leave. Because she was ready to. The paperwork had been sitting on her desk for 3 days. Voluntary discharge. No ceremony. No headlines. Hayes had signed it already. Effective immediately, it read. Sergeant Lee Monroe, honorably discharged, with full recommendation and unclassified commendation. The words looked too neat for what they meant. She stared at the page, ran her fingers across the ink, then folded it once carefully. No hesitation, no regret. Just acceptance. That afternoon, she packed her locker. It didn't take long. One uniform. A few photographs, none of herself. The trident patch. She paused at that one. Ran her thumb over it, the raised edges worn smooth with time. That small symbol had once been her whole identity. Now it was just history. She didn't put it in the box. She pinned it inside the locker door instead. Some things you leave behind on purpose. As she was leaving the barracks, a voice called out. "Chief." She turned. Private Miller jogged up, still half out of breath from drills. He looked nervous, like someone trying to say too much with too few words. "They said you're leaving." She nodded, "That's right." He hesitated. "Is it true what they said, that you were that you?" She cut him off gently. "It doesn't matter what I was, Private. What matters is what you'll become." He looked down. I wanted to say thank you for that day, for teaching us what real calm looks like." She smiled softly. "Calm isn't something you teach, Miller. It's something you earn, usually the hard way." He nodded, eyes wet. "We won't forget you." She shook her head. "You will, that's the way it should be." Then she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just remember, noise fades fast, but the way you carry yourself in silence, that's what lasts." He nodded again, jaw tight, trying not to show emotion. She saw it anyway. Outside, the base was humming with life. Helicopters overhead. Engines roaring. The sound of the world moving forward. Lee stood for a moment at the gate, looking back at it all. Every inch of ground behind that fence held a story, some of pain, some of pride, all of them unfinished. She adjusted her duffel on her shoulder, nodded to the gate guard, and stepped through. No parade. No salute. Just the quiet click of boots against concrete, fading into distance. The bus to Atlanta was nearly empty. She took the window seat near the back, watching pine trees slide past in green and gold streaks. The world outside moved slow, like it knew she needed it to. She thought of Bahrain, of Ray's, of Briggs, of fire and smoke and ocean and silence. All of it had led here, this simple moment, alone, anonymous, free. The road hummed beneath the tires. The driver hummed to an old country song. And for the first time in years, Lee let her body relax fully into the seat. When she reached Atlanta, she didn't head for a hotel or an airport. She walked. Through crowded streets, through the noise of people living ordinary lives, lives that didn't revolve around orders or ranks or survival. Every sound, laughter, horns, footsteps, felt distant but warm. Eventually, she reached a small park near the edge of the city. There was a pond there. Still water, winter gray, mirroring the clouds above. She sat on a bench, duffel at her feet, hands folded in her lap. For a long time, she just watched the water. And in it, she saw everything she'd ever been trying to outrun, not as ghosts anymore, but as reflections. Ray's laugh. Logan's grin. Briggs's trembling apology. Hayes's understanding eyes. They weren't haunting her. They were reminding her that she'd kept her promise. Stay calm, stay ready, carry the standard. She had. A soft breeze moved across the pond. Leaves rippled the surface. The reflection broke, then reformed. She smiled faintly. For years, she'd believed the water only took. Now she understood, sometimes it gives back too. Not lives, not second chances. Just understanding. And that's enough. Her phone buzzed once, a message. Unknown number. She opened it. Video message raise. She pressed play. The screen showed him sitting in a recovery room. Bandages gone now, hair shorter, voice steadier. "Hey, Chief," he said, smiling. "Just wanted to tell you I'm heading home. You were right. The sea doesn't take everything. Some things it just holds for a while." He paused, eyes softening. "And hey, you ever get tired of quiet, come visit. I'll make bad coffee. You can laugh at my limp." The video ended. Lee smiled. "Maybe," she whispered. She saved the message, locked the screen, and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Evening fell slowly. The sky burned gold, then orange, then quiet gray. The park emptied. The pond darkened until it looked almost like the ocean again, still, endless, deep. She stood, slung the duffel over her shoulder, and took one last look at the water. Then she whispered, "Stay calm, Rays, you too." Her voice carried softly, like a promise to the wind. Days passed. Weeks. Lee rented a small cabin near the Blue Ridge foothills, a place without sirens, without ranks, without ghosts. She lived simply. Woke with the sun. Ran at dawn. Read at night. Sometimes she'd hike to the ridge where the view stretched for miles, valleys wrapped in fog, trees breathing beneath clouds. And she'd stand there, hands in her pockets, just watching. No uniform. No name tag. Just her. Peace wasn't something she found all at once. It came in moments. Quiet, small, real. The sound of rain on tin. The smell of coffee before sunrise. The whisper of wind against the trees. Each moment reminded her that the world moves on, and that it's okay when you do too. One morning she opened her duffel and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a folded flag, a single dog tag, and a strip of weathered cloth from her old uniform, the one from Bahrain. She carried the box to the ridge, knelt, and placed it beneath a cedar tree. No words. No ceremony. Just the quiet act of letting go. When she stood again, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of salt, impossible, this far inland, but unmistakable. She smiled. "Guess you're still watching," she whispered. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, she sat on the porch, writing in a small leather journal, something she hadn't done since she was 19. The first line read, "It's strange, learning to live without fear, stranger still to live without purpose." Then she paused, thought for a while, and added, "But maybe peace is purpose too." She closed the book, leaned back, and listened. The crickets sang. The woods breathed. The world, for once, didn't need saving. And neither did she. In the final light of dusk, she spoke aloud to the air, to the past, to whoever might still be listening. "I used to think strength was about holding the line. Now I know it's about knowing when to let go." She smiled softly. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The camera would pull back here if this were film. Just her sitting on that porch, the horizon painted gold and blue, the breeze brushing her hair. A woman who walked through fire, through water, through silence. And came out whole. Not a legend. Not a myth. Just human. And maybe that's the bravest thing anyone can be.